C10 is the latest version of LG's most popular OLED TV. It marries the great image quality of its OLED panel with its future-facing connectivity in its HDMI 2.1 ports. But is it just a rebadged C9 from last year, or are there updates that make it a better buy? Well, in this review, that's exactly what we're going to talk about, so stick around. Hey guys, it's the Villaman here, home theater enthusiast and lover of all things tech. And on this channel, we review, demo, and compare the tech that entertains you. So if you're new here and you like awesome and informative videos, then make sure to hit that subscribe button and come along for the ride. So I've been thinking about how best to review this TV because I reviewed the C9 last year and it was one of the best TVs that you could get at the time. And when you look at the C10, well, at least on the surface, not much seems to have changed. So just so you understand where I'm coming from, let's go over some of the key specs of the TV. It has a nice modern and minimalistic design with thin bezels and an impossibly thin screen and a broad yet understated stand, which gives it a very modern look. The pixels on screen have a WRGB subpixel array and it has 4 HDMI 2.1 ports for next-gen consoles, which are the most you'll find on any TV right now. It supports HDR10, Hybrid Log Gamma, and Dolby Vision HDR standards, and comes in a 55, 65, 77, and new for 2020, a 48-inch screen size. Now, everything I just mentioned, besides the 48-inch screen size, is exactly what you get on the C9. The TV runs LG's WebOS, which has seen some UI changes for this year's model. It has smart assistants built in and even supports Apple's HomeKit. It has the Apple TV streaming apps for streaming content, but when it comes to other apps, the WebOS store is still barren when compared to other platforms like Android, Roku, or even Samsung's Tizen OS. Things like HBO Now or ESPN and pretty much every network TV app are nowhere to be found. It's been like that for so long that I'm starting to think that it'll never change. So if you're an avid streamer, you might want to consider getting yourself a streaming box. So the question now is, how does the C10 actually differentiate itself, and are those differences worth it? Well, this year it's all about software and the internal hardware that runs it. As a result, there's some new brains in town, the Alpha 9 Gen 3 AI processor. With that comes LG's AI Picture Pro, which is a part of its wider AI service. The AI service can customize the sound profile, brightness, and picture modes based on your environment and the content you're watching. That's something you won't find in last year's model. What the AI Picture does is it uses machine learning to identify and matches objects on screen to a database to better upscale it. This is actually something that Sony has been doing for a few years now, but it's great to see LG also doing it because in practice, it looks really impressive. I compared it to Samsung's upscaling in my 2020 OLED versus QLED picture quality comparison video, so if you want to see it in action, then check it out in the link up there or in the description. So that's it? No, there's also the filmmaker picture mode, which is different from the cinema mode that you'll also find in last year's model. It disables all picture processing enhancements to give you a more faithful reproduction of the director's intent. So the colors and motion will be represented how they should be. The AI processor isn't infallible though. I did notice some picture processing and motion interpolation errors when I did the screen test, where there would be artifacting on the edges of objects when the de-judder and the blur reduction were activated. It's by no means a deal breaker, and it's something that can be thankfully fixed with a firmware update, as they've done with their other TVs over the years. But that being said, the pessimist in me is weary of buying current tech in anticipation of future fixes. In practice though, the AI service was a hit and miss. For example, it's supposed to automatically detect the content you're watching and switch to the appropriate picture mode. But even when I had my Blu-ray player connected and the auto switch to filmmaker mode setting enabled, the TV stayed in the standard picture mode. Also, if you say watch a bunch of streaming content on your console, the TV on the Xbox at least will automatically switch to game mode when using the Xbox, and when in game mode, it disables the AI picture pro settings. So even if you're watching, say, a movie on Netflix, you'll have to change the mode manually. As far as the picture quality goes, it still has staples like dynamic tone mapping to help display scenes that are brighter than the TV can support natively. This, I think, is one of the most indispensable features of modern OLEDs because you get all the benefits of having, pitch black scenes while also maintaining highlight detail in the brighter parts. HGIG is basically another component of dynamic tone mapping, but created specifically for gaming. With HGIG, the console or PC communicates with the TV and essentially does the tone mapping for it, while with the standard dynamic tone mapping, the tone mapping is handled by the TV itself. I found where the picture is generally brighter and more contrasty with dynamic tone mapping enabled, and while HGIG should make dynamic tone mapping redundant in the future with supported devices, it will not only need to be supported by the device that you're playing on, but also implemented in that specific game itself. So that being the case right now, there won't be a difference between HGIG being on and dynamic tone mapping being off. While when I turned dynamic tone mapping on, it was brighter and punchier, but there was a noticeable loss in some highlight detail. That said, the C9 also supports both of these features, so that's also again nothing new. Speaking of gaming, this TV supports HDMI 2.1's variable refresh rate feature, VRR. It also more specifically supports NVIDIA's G-Sync and has recently gained support for AMD's FreeSync via a firmware update. I wanted to test the high frame rate gaming on the TV, and since at the time of this video we're still waiting on those next gen consoles, can't time travel, I decided to use my PC instead, and it was such a great experience. Racing at 120 frames per second was amazingly smooth. It makes you kind of not want to go back to lower frame rates. The frame rate wasn't always locked at 120 frames per second with such a high resolution, so there were of course some fluctuations in the frame rate, but the image remained crisp and without even a hint of tearing. At least in Forza. Doom Eternal, on the other hand, was a problem child. Because Doom is such a hectic experience, the frame rate fluctuated wildly at times and it resulted in noticeable screen tearing. I couldn't have both HDR enabled at the same time while doing the Forza test, since it's an HDMI 2.1 graphics card and it just doesn't have the signal bandwidth to transmit 120 frames per second at 4K with HDR. But all that just makes the wait for the new consoles that much harder. There has been some controversy about the change in HDMI 2.1 bandwidth from the C9. The HDMI bandwidth of the C10 has been lowered by about 20% from the 48 gigabits per second HDMI 2.1 spec to 40 gigabits per second. But that change might not actually have any real world implications. If you haven't checked out the gaming test yet, or the OLED versus QLED gaming comparison, then you can use the card up there or the links in the description. Overall, the changes from the C9 to the C10 are below the surface. There's nothing really tangible to differentiate last year's model from this year's model. The C9 had an absolutely stellar picture, and that certainly hasn't changed with the C10. In fact, with the AI services, it makes getting a great picture and sound for different content even easier, at least as soon as all the issues are addressed. But that said, the new model is certainly more expensive than the older one, naturally, and that being the case, is it really worth spending extra for the C10? Not really. If you're in the market for an LG C series OLED, then I'd say get the C9 and treat yourself to a nice dinner, or with the money you saved, better yet, a streaming box. And if you can't find the C9, then of course there'll be more than enough C10s available. Happy hunting. It makes you wonder though, have we reached peak 4K TV? That's a conversation for another time though. Let me know your thoughts about this TV. Will you be buying one? Have you already bought one? Or is there something else that catches your fancy? Let me know in the comments. If you want to help support the channel so we can bring you more content like this, then be sure to buy your TV using the links in the description, or you can buy an awesome t-shirt like this one. Don't forget to like the video if you liked it or found it helpful, and subscribe if you haven't. Thanks for watching, and until next time, this has been your friend and neighborhood Villaman saying, be safe and peace.